Kerfuffle are proud to present Julian O'Dell, a man with a plan.
Hello everybody and welcome here today. I am tremendously excited to a exclusive of Kerfuffle here. We have done it, haven't we, Julian? The two most sartorially brilliant dressed people in the industry have finally made the magic happen. The Thriller in Manila. Here we are. Look at this. Absolutely perfect. With your own catchphrase in the very top hand corner. Marvellous. Mr.
Absolutely.
Julian O'Dell, welcome here to the Kerfuffle platform. How the devil are you, sir?
Thank you for having me, Mr. Whale. You're looking pretty in pink as always. I thought I'd try and blend in. So yeah, I'm good. I'm very, very good. Bunkered down at home as I have been now for 10 months.
I'm broadcasting here today from Newcastle, as you can see. So
I can see you've got your patio doors open. Yeah, very nice too. I'm any human interaction with anyone other than my wife is very welcome. So yeah, good to see you. Good to see you.
Excellent. Well, I couldn't be happier. Obviously, we've known each other many years since you shamelessly beat me to a Supplier of the Year at Sunday Times, and
Yeah.
I've never stopped going on about it.
It's on the wall, literally just over there. I can see it. I nearly hung it behind me. I thought that might upset you.
I'll never forget the day there, Julian. There, Peter Fenwick. We got a bronze, silver. This is ours, Peter. This is ours. Get your jacket on. Julian O'Dell and TM. Anyway, well, look, if you can't beat them, join them, aren't you? And as I said, we're really couldn't be any more pleased, Julian, to be teaming up with you.
Likewise.
One of the real things I think we both have a commitment, obviously, to training and development, and you practiced and preached it, whereas I just kind of bullshit my way through a little bit. But the thing that I find a little bit frustrating in this industry is that there's a lot of people that talk the talk, isn't there? And we've spoke about this endlessly about how important training is and training and development and everything else, and simply. The actions don't match the words, do they? A lot of the time, and we have looked at the reasons why that happens. And actually, things like we're in the middle of lockdown. These are lockdown lessons we're looking at today. And at the very time, often you actually need to have your staff at the very best, pivoting with a new marketplace. Often that's the time when, really frustratingly, people drop the training budget and everything else. And I know you and I have had long conversations about this, and we've. Again, I suppose one of the ways we've had to innovate, as you mentioned, you've been doing this now digitally and via Zoom as we're doing now, is that, look, whatever way you used to look at it in the past, getting together in offices is a big commitment of time. It's, it can be expensive as well, just to get people out of the office and to travel and all the other things, other than your very worthy fee as well in terms of there. And actually, what we're trying to do today, as many people are, I think, is give people more access in a bit of a Netflixy style, aren't we, Julian? To make it more accessible when they need it, on whatever device they need it, and dealing with the issues of the day in a really topical and updated fashion.
Yeah, that's spot on, and I think it's really interesting when you back in the day, I used to go to many conferences as you did yourself, and it was interesting the sort of plethora of stalls. It was all about, it seemed to be all about tech and gadgetry and software and, all that sort of hard sort of stuff, and very little about skill development. And I think it's quite interesting that a number of companies that I've interacted with in the property world are guilty of huge investments in the tech side of things, but which obviously is essential and creates opportunities, but then they don't train the staff to handle those opportunities and turn them into business. And I think it's there's a famous quote by a guy called Will Rogers who said, if companies spent the same amount of money on improving their services as they did on advertising them, then they wouldn't have to advertise them. And I think that's a really interesting quote, because my experience as a grumpy old man these days, whether it be remotely or in person, is the service I receive in all sorts of sectors is disappointing and not what I would expect. But the interesting thing is, those companies involved have spent huge amounts of money hooking me in the first place, and then the actual experience, because of the human beings that interact with me, is substandard. So I won't go back, and I think unfortunately there's a lot of that in estate agency. So yeah, we've I'm not sure I like the word pivot. I think I'm a bit old for pivoting. I put me back out if I do too much of that. But yeah, we're now delivering high quality training via Zoom predominantly, and it's going down fantastically well. I have to say, it's more flexible, it's cheaper, because people, as you rightly say, haven't got to hire conference rooms, that staff haven't got to drive or get trains to places, and a lot of it they can record and re-watch or watch for the first time at a time that suits them. And of course, you know, as we may mention at some point, we've worked together with Kerfuffle to start to create a library of resources that that I think are going to will tick a lot of boxes on the training side of things.
Yeah, very exciting. And the main one, of course, Julian, it's not just the chosen few who are sent along to the training session. Everyone in the business can consume this training, can't they, as well, which is fantastic. So that's really good. Yeah, I think it's really good. I think absolutely what you say there. You know, people do judge, and it's not just judging against competitor agents, is it? Actually, you're being judged a bit against customer service just in general out there. So if somebody in a different sector is actually delivering something well, and you let that down just by not answering the phone or not dealing with it in a sprightly fashion, then that's an issue. And I think the key thing for me is it's almost like there's no second chances these days, isn't there? You know, you really need to take that, seize that moment, deal with it there and then, because otherwise they're just not coming back.
Well, you know, one of the again, cliches are cliches for a reason. They're cliches because they've been around and stood the test of time. And one of the classic training cliches is you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Everyone will have heard that before. That's nothing new, but it's true. And the bottom line is, if you don't deal with somebody in the right way, and you know, let's talk about the real nuts and bolts of estate agency. Stock is where it begins and ends, and it's all very well attracting inquiries, etc. But if I played you some of the calls that we've been hearing over the last 12 months in lockdown and out of lockdown, where customers have been dealt with in such a haphazard, shoddy fashion. I mean, the classics are things like you know, fee inquiries, for example, a potential vendor phoning in saying how much you charge for selling. Well, a great agent will turn that into a valuation. In fact, a great agent will turn that into a valuation where perhaps they're the only agent to be called out because they handle that fee inquiry in such a brilliant fashion. But if I played you some of the calls that we've recorded on mystery shopping exercises, it would make your hair curl. I mean, it makes my hair curl, and that's saying something. You know, just the real horrific stuff whereby that fee inquiry is a million miles away from being dealt with in the right way. And that's just one little snapshot. But, you know, again, interesting how companies will invest in marketing, invest in social media activity, invest in branding and all sorts of things to get that phone call coming in from someone who's got that agent on their radar as being an agent they might use to sell their property, and then it goes no further because the human being doesn't deal with it in the right way. And that's where I think we need the balance between you know, tech and training, really, you know, those two things together.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, well, I couldn't agree with any more of that. And so I'm delighted to say today you've got a plan, haven't you? So this is helpful for people like my good self here. You've summarised what you feel is really a series of steps, best practice to help you out. And it's fair to say we're looking at this now in this, what are we, in the third lockdown period. But actually, this is just good. A lot of this is just great best practice anyway, isn't it, in terms of...
Entirely, yeah. I mean, again, obviously things are different in a lockdown scenario in the way certain things are done. That's completely understandable. But best practice is best practice. And what we've done, and we actually piloted this quietly in the first lockdown, just with a handful of selected clients, the concept of having this plan. And it's quite neat and tidy having this plan, because the plan is 4 things which begin with the letters PLAN. You know, life doesn't always work out as neatly and tidily as that sometimes, but the plan is PLAN, plan, and that helps agents remember what those 4 points are, and then obviously to put them into practice. So we did it under the radar. You know, there were a number of people came out in the first lockdown to tell agents how to run their business, and I sort of sat back and played a bit of a waiting game, because I thought, well, I haven't got a big enough ego to tell agents how to run their business in a pandemic, because actually I've never been in one, and yes, I've run an estate agency, was a partner of an award-winning estate agency for many years, but I hadn't worked in a pandemic, and I didn't have the ego to stand there or sit there and say this is what you should be doing. So I kind of spoke to clients quietly and kept my powder dry to an extent. But now I think we've learned lots of lessons, and thankfully the points that we covered in the plan, the very first version of the plan, I've had great feedback from our client firms who said, yeah, it got them through that very difficult period last year, and the things that they did then, they're still doing to make them successful now. So as ever, this plan has evolved, and it's valid for, you know, today, but no doubt it will evolve as the weeks and months go by, and it's something that, you know, agents can add to or tweak as they go. But yeah, 4 component parts: and they are protect,
Yep.
lead, assess, and new techniques and new practices. So protect, lead, assess, new techniques, new practice, PLAN. And that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, really, in kind of that order, you know.
Well, first things first, of course, as you said, on the ego point, don't worry, I've got that baton. I'll run with that. Quite happy to tell people how to run their business after having no experience myself. Secondly, it passes the Simon Whale test because I can remember plan. Sometimes you come up with these acronyms or whatever they're called, aren't they? And it's harder to remember the actual thing than it is to come up with it. But it's very simple, very concise. But obviously, we had a brief conversation about it beforehand, but this is the first time I'm hearing it, so if you don't mind me just quizzing you on a couple of the things.
But the L is for lead. And again, some of the things we talked about would bleed into that. So, the idea of managing your staff in the right way, the idea of regular meetings, etc. I think once you've got your strategy clear for the next few weeks or months in terms of how you're going to run your business in lockdown, whether it's changed at all, obviously it could just be that you're carrying on as you were, but whatever the situation is, whether you're going to furlough people, have some of them working from home, a number of companies now are having sort of two teams, a work from home team and a office team, and maybe occasionally swapping them over and keeping it fresh like that. But whatever you're doing, I think the key to it as a leader is to be in the trenches with the guys and obviously to communicate with them so they know exactly what's going on, because the last thing you want is those guys taking their eye off the ball and thinking, are we okay? I would be sharing with them what you need to do as a absolute bare minimum in terms of figures. Yes, we've had a make hay while the sun shines scenario for a good few months now. Will that continue as the stamp duty holiday comes to an end? Will it continue, assuming it does come to an end, will it continue afterwards? Again, I'm old enough to remember the double Myrus scenario back in 1988, where the Chancellor at the time said, buy a house by this date and you get 2 lots of tax relief. So everybody charged to be in by the end of August. The office I was running at the time sold 42 properties compared to a typical average of 10 or a dozen. We sold 42 houses in June. In the September, we sold 4, because obviously everyone that would normally have bought later in the year, earlier in the year. And I do wonder and worry that we may hit that type of scenario. So let's not, accept that the market is going to fly right the way through this year. We could be in for some difficult times. And again, if it goes quiet, your staff need to focus on best practice and winkle out the business, and all these best practice ideas, whether it be qualifying applicants, looking for valuations, whatever it may be, will make a difference. So I think it's good to share the burden of where you are, what you need to do as a business, the sort of levels of figures, and make sure that they are seeing you in the trenches with them.
And by the way, Julian, I think one thing you mentioned there earlier, didn't you? You've got to remember as well is that there's a huge amount of experience locked up in most of these business owners, as you said, whether it's 88 or even 2008. Much of the staff haven't been, okay, none of us have been through a pandemic, but we have been through kind of tough times as well, isn't it? And that experience is just massively valuable, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, absolutely. And we'll get through, the best companies will get through this period, even if the market does take a significant turn for the worst, and even if the pandemic continues longer than we hope it does, companies will come out the other end, because there's some great companies out there. But it is doing the basics. And as a leader, I think the absolute essential element of being a leader of people is, well, it's a huge subject, and we do a whole load of training on that in it. But one of the key lessons, I think, is that you lead by example, whether you intend to or not. That's a key management lesson. So whatever atmosphere you're creating, whatever mood you're in, that people are feeding off that. So I think you need to stay positive. I think you need to to be giving positive messages out there, and obviously, as we said, collective team meetings to keep the team motivated. The other thing I would remind you of is what I call the management cycle, which I think you need to be on 24/7. It is not a mode of transport. The management cycle is 3 stages: plan, monitor, check, plan, monitor, check, plan, monitor, check. And you should be on that cycle the whole time you're being a manager. So for example, in simple terms, it could be as simple as, let's have a morning meeting every day, which is our planning bit. Let's review in the day, you as the manager reviewing in the day, during the day, that's your monitoring. And at the end of the day, let's check in and make sure, we've got to where we. Now that's particularly relevant, I think, for in a branch, but it's as relevant, if not more so, for those working from home, because obviously you're not there seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that plan and monitor and check cycle, lots of managers go wrong with that because they do a bit of planning, they dish things out to people, but they then don't monitor and don't check. And that brings me to the third rule of leadership that I would really make sure that you adhere to during this time, which is that people do what you inspect, not what you expect. And obviously from that perspective, make sure that not sitting over their shoulder like Big Brother, but if you want these people to, if you want to get the best out of them when you're issuing them stuff to do, don't expect them to do it, because that'll catch you out.
Yeah, that's really key. That's you've met him, Rich Durant. He's our strategic director, ex-MD of Intercounty, and that's one of his favourite quotes. You know, it really is, isn't it? And it's the old, measure. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, isn't it? It's the same flip side of the coin, isn't it? Essentially, there, and I think it's really important as well in setting clear expectations, isn't it? As well. So, I mean, there's only one thing more dangerous than a business with no kind of targets or KPIs, and that's the one that goes via the scale and has too many, doesn't it? So there is a Goldilocks zone for this sort of thing, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I think if you're leading people, let's say you've got some people working from home for all sorts of reasons. You've got people working from home. Again, you hear slightly, perhaps slightly jaded and cynical people say, well, they're going to sit, as we said earlier on, sit and watch Netflix and blah blah blah. Well, in my experience, that's down to the manager to manage them in a way that means they haven't got a chance to sit and watch Netflix and eat crisps. In other words, you may not measure them in this particular period of time on results per se, because it's difficult to know where the market's going to be going. And already I'm hearing, even 3 days into lockdown, I'm hearing that it's got a lot quieter. I was speaking to an agent just before we started this meeting, Simon, who based down in Kent, whose quote to me was, "We can't buy a valuation at the moment. It's just sudden, and that is a sudden thing. It's an active office." And now again, that's Kent, and no doubt people tuning into this from Leeds or Cornwall might find it entirely differently. But I'm just sensing there's that downturn there, and I think so. What you need to be careful of doing as a leader, and the lead part of the plan, is to make sure that you are managing those people from a distance by giving them tasks to do that are still measurable, because they have to be measurable, of course, and that might be phoning X amount of old valuations in a day, or training them to qualify to the nth degree, and working on the database and making sure you end up with a nice lean, mean, fully qualified database at the end of that period of working from home, and all of those sorts of things, making sure you're targeting and rewarding behaviors as opposed to necessarily the hard and fast sales results, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And just on that key point there, in terms of just prospecting and talking to people on your database, I've heard a lot of people, a lot of agents that are very nervous about being perceived to be phoning up during a pandemic there. Do you need, what's your view on that? Do you need to just get over that? Is that a mental barrier? Is there a change? Is there a nuance that you can actually contact people with just in a slightly different way?
Are you talking about applicants, or talking which group are you talking about?
Prospecting for potential vendors, basically.
Okay. So you've got a huge variety of people then within that group of prospective vendors, which would include old valuations. It would include former instructions that came off the market without selling for whatever reason. It would include local people with houses to sell who are on your applicant database, and all sorts of others within that you've got connections with. So really interested in this, and I'm speaking from a personal point of view. For me, if I was a negotiator working from home, I would want to be busy, and I would be more than happy to phone up people that we've dealt with before, or whatever, if my target was to try and generate some valuations, or even virtual valuations, maybe, whatever, or certainly talk to people that way, because that way the day goes quicker and I'm feeling a sense of accomplishment and stuff like that. That would be me, and I guess that goes for most estate agency staff. And so if you are targeted to phone those people, I don't think there's any issue phoning them. I'm surprised, actually, putting my homeowner hat on. We've lived in this house 8 years. We have never had contact from the agents that we dealt with 8 years ago. We get the occasional leaflet through the door, but I'm talking about once every, I don't know, 6 months or so, maybe 4 months, not very, very few. And actually something that I would welcome the opportunity to do, albeit that we've got to be careful and everything else. I'd love to know what my house is worth now.
Yeah,
'Cause
I've got a suspicion there, Julian. I think it's a bit like the scary house that the kids are scared to go in, isn't it? You're essentially the bogeyman in terms of
yeah,
that's the fella that does all of the mystery shopping.
yeah. Yeah, there may be a sense of that, admittedly, but no, even if they phone me up and just said, you bought this house 8 years ago, just sort of touch base with you, give me a virtual valuation, give me a ballpark, tell me what the market's doing.
I just don't think there can be a better excuse, can there, during this, realistically, in terms of the reason. A lot of people talking out just to check that everyone's kind of okay and everything else as well there. And just look, you'll have seen a lot, obviously, in the market going on in the marketplace. We're here if and when you need us. Just a nice, gentle conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, and some of those people are at home and have got by definition more time to have a conversation. And even if you winkle out a few that are saying, well, yeah, once the pandemic's through and washed through and world gets back to normal, funnily enough,
yeah,
it's quite obviously. I mean, one of the things I think that took us by surprise was the level of activity after lockdown 1. But when you think about it, maybe we shouldn't have been surprised, because what happened? Well, people bunkered down at home.
Yeah.
They probably thought, well, my house is too small, my house is too big, my house is too drafty, I haven't got outside space and I'm sick of being cooped up here, I want to get a garden, I don't like my partner. I do like my partner. In fact, I like her so much that she now is expecting a baby, and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. All of that stuff's gone. Life goes on in lockdown, and it's created perhaps that spur of activity, and I think you can harness that. I'm amazed that again, working from home or whatever, if incoming activity dips, I don't think there's ever enough hours in the day to proactively contact people that you've had. Again, famously, people talk about previous clients. Well, to me, a client is a client, whether they were a client 2 years ago or 5 years ago. If you've got access to them, to pick up the phone and have a conversation, because I tell you what, you will definitely winkle out some business, and the one thing that is for certain that you won't winkle it out without making it.
You obviously our Aussie friend, Mr. Josh Spiegel, he tries to correct people, doesn't he? He says, stop talking about them as past clients. They are clients you talk about there. Yeah. And I love that change in ethos, isn't it? It's really, they're just a client for life. Get over it. You're staying in contact with them and you're providing a valuable service. Stop being guilty about it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think all part of that L of the plan, the leadership, is all about making sure that you've got those, that you're deploying your staff in the right way, that you're focusing, that you're managing that plan, monitor and check cycle, and just keeping that they're moving forward.
Absolutely fantastic, Julie. So we've got plan, haven't we? So a really nice, easy to implement, although there's nothing intrinsically difficult in there, is there? But you do need to just have the regiment to sit down and make sure you follow it. That's the key to all of these things, isn't it? Turning them into habits, isn't it?
Well, I think the best things in life are simple, aren't they? Much like you and myself, Simon. But
it's got the name.
Yeah, we don't overcomplicate things at Marvelous Training Solutions. As I say, I think estate agents is a simple business. I think it's still inherently a people business. And the plan for lockdown 3.0, protect, lead, assess, and new ideas, that's something that we would recommend. And obviously, in the confines of an event like this, or a meeting like this, conversation like this, it's difficult maybe to get everything across. And if anybody wants to have a conversation separately, obviously very, very happy to do so.
Absolutely great. Well, look, what a fantastic sort of structure you've given there, people, right at the start of the year to do it. As we've said, great for lockdown there, but this can be implemented anytime, can't it? And carried out there. So I think that, well, to use your phrase, marvellous, obviously, absolutely fantastic feedback. Once again, I just want to say, obviously, very, very excited working with you, and I encourage everyone to get in contact and talk. Obviously, the great man himself is available for gigs, as I always talk about. He's the James Brown of training. You're still here in a Zoom form, aren't you? And as he said, and we've got the digital now, so there's no excuse at all, is there, Julian, for one of the others, obviously, to be able to have training for not just yourself these days, but all your staff. And that's what I think is most exciting about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We cover everything. So yeah, anybody that feels they have any training needs, we will be able to deliver some form of solution, without a doubt.
Fantastic. Well, as I said, absolutely great. Thanks very much for looking so resplendent today. Absolutely gold dust in there to be talking about. We'll look forward to some more of these over the coming weeks and months. Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, top man. Thanks for your time, Simon. Nice to see you. And just go for a dip in the sea and enjoy your afternoon.
Cheers, matey. Thank you.
Cheers.
That was Julian O'Dell, our man with a plan. Tune in next time, kerfufflers.